I'm going to talk to you about venture philanthropy. And I think that it's one of those words that people hear an awful lot and, assume that they know the correct meaning and just kind of gloss over it. And I found in talking to a lot of families in the Duchenne community that they really don't understand it and aren't really sure exactly, what CureDuchenne is doing with our research model. And it's interesting. I was earlier this week on a panel down in North Carolina with a lot of other large disease group foundations. It was a dementia foundation, cystic fibrosis, Chris Pendlin, I think you might know. He's wonderful, by the way. And multiple sclerosis, and JDRF, and American Cancer Association. And so they all have developed their venture philanthropy models over the year. And I would like to say, however, a little call out to cystic fibrosis for being a real early leader in this venture philanthropy model. However, CureDuchenne came on really early, back in 2004 with our venture philanthropy. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit about how we got to be where we are. And first of all, looking at some definitions of what is venture philanthropy. A lot of different phrases that I hear frequently in addition to venture philanthropy are angel philanthropy, impact philanthropy, enterprise philanthropy, strategic philanthropy, but they all have the word philanthropy with them. I've tried to simplify it a little bit in my mind, and the words and the terminology that we use at CureDuchenne is for the model that we have currently is venture philanthropy. Venture philanthropy, if you look at the definition of venture, it's basically a business enterprise or speculation in which something is risked in hope of profit. Sounds like drug development, doesn't it? And philanthropy, an idea, event, or action that is done to better humanity and usually involves some sacrifice as opposed to being done for profit motive. And so venture philanthropy is really marrying the two together of doing good and possibly making a return in the end. A lot of people, I think the most common other phrase would be impact investing. And just to clarify the difference, venture philanthropy is where the money that is coming in is coming through donations from philanthropy to do good work for a charitable cause. Impact investing is when the dollars coming in are investment dollars that are expected to return a financial profit, and hopefully they are addressing a good cause, at least not doing harm. So CureDuchenne's model has been venture philanthropy. And so the proceeds that CureDuchenne Ventures has been our research arm. And CureDuchenne Ventures is wholly owned by CureDuchenne. Up until this point, CureDuchenne has been the only investor in the CureDuchenne Ventures programs. And so we fund research across the globe by leveraging the venture philanthropy to encourage new drug treatment and development. And why do we do this? So years ago when we started CureDuchenne, and we started funding academic research projects. And I was in business before and worked a lot of contracts and negotiations. I had never, ever experienced contract negotiation like I did with academic institutions. It was very, very slow. You're laughing. Very, very slow. And when you really think about it, the output of an academic institution is to write a paper and publish a paper. And the motivation and the output for a biotech company is to develop a drug and get a drug approved. So I just tended to be a little bit more in alignment with drug companies because they're the ones that made drugs. And again, not to diminish the importance of academic scientists in any way, because obviously that's where the early science starts, and we absolutely need to support that academic research. And I see our scientific genius leaving and walking out the door right now. Bye, Mike. Cheers, thanks. And speaking of a very important component of CureDuchenne Ventures, Mike Kelly. So would you play the video, please? This is a little video on CureDuchenne's progress in venture philanthropy.
With every dollar you donate, you're helping CureDuchenne continue our mission to find a cure for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But how exactly is your money used? With transparency as our core value, we make sure 90% of our investment proceeds are redeployed into forward-thinking research programs. Through CureDuchenne Ventures, we fund groundbreaking research into next-gen drug and treatment development. We ensure that all of our investment partners and grant-funded partners share our fundamental goals of accelerating research. The success of these research projects amplifies our investment, allowing us to reinvest that money into our cause. And because of our specific expertise, our investments help to de-risk critical research, attracting additional funding from pharmaceutical companies and outside investors. This exponentially increases Duchenne funding. Utilizing innovative science to bring our cause forward, we use our business acumen to strategically invest into CureDuchenne efforts that make the greatest impact and yield a positive return, helping patients and their families while bringing our cause closer to a cure every day. Since 2003, we've made great headway with our investments, but there's still work to be done. Today, outside of steroids, only 13% of Duchenne patients have treatment access. And the only way we can continue to fund next-gen research is to keep the development pipeline full. So join us in funding programs today to help bring more impactful treatments to all affected by Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Okay, so using the venture philanthropy model, what we do as an organization is, as the slide, the video said, we find, fund, and nurture these investments. We basically are looking at very, very early science where we can go into a project with Mike Kelly and our scientific advisory board, do a deep dive into the science, find out if it makes sense for Duchenne number 1, if the science is sound, if the management team has the wherewithal to take it over the finish line. And we basically invest a relatively small amount of money that we raise through galas and through different families around the country. And we invest it and basically take the risk out of it by doing this. And as a result, we're able to attract the attention of biotech firms, venture capital companies, and pharmaceutical companies who, are a lot more risk averse actually, and allow us to do the heavy lifting in terms of the early science, and then they will take it over. And CureDuchenne is not in the drug development business. We have no intention of taking over and owning a molecule or a drug or a therapy of any kind. It's our goal is to, be the scout, go out, find the best science for this disease, and then try and take as much risk out of it so that we can attract larger dollars. And we are very committed that 90% of any gains that we receive from profits in these investments goes right back into subsequent funding projects, and we redeploy those funds completely. And the reason why we have CureDuchenne Ventures set up as a separate entity is just to establish discipline and transparency on our part so that the money that goes into CureDuchenne Ventures, into our research fund, stays in our research fund and it doesn't get commingled with our other operations. So venture philanthropy really is the gift that keeps giving. So when you donate $1, when you do a small event and raise $20,000 through family and friends, or raise $5,000 through family and friends, and those dollars go into a larger pool that we're able to invest in a company. If that science is successful and a biotech company comes in, for example, we invested $1.3 million or $1.5 million in Bamboo Therapeutics, a North Carolina gene therapy company. And 7 months later, Pfizer came in and bought the company. So, our $1.5 million will equal, over the course of the agreement between Bamboo and Pfizer, over $600 million of investment money into this project. And so, you can see how your smaller amounts of dollars can really multiply through these investments. And the objective here is to really create an evergreen fund for Duchenne, where we can eventually, through wise investments, we can eventually develop a fund that's big enough that we have the money on hand that we can quickly react to opportunities. And I can tell you there have been more than once where we've been talking with a biotech company that had a really good idea, something that could have really moved the needle for Duchenne. But they were choosing between diseases that they were going to address. And we would have had to have immediately had, like $5 million to write a check at that point to entice them to take Duchenne on as a target because they had other options. We didn't have that money readily available, and we were not able to raise it through the Duchenne community through fundraising, and they went on to address other diseases, unfortunately. So having a fund of readily available money would be significant to be able to maximize those opportunities. So again, our goal is to find the best science and fund it through donor dollars, and we do that through online fundraising with families. We do it through gala events. We do it through direct mail. We do it through an awful lot of Paul's and my friends and family over the years, and just the networks that we've built. And then we really foster the technology. So we don't just bring money to these biotech companies. We bring knowledge of the disease and the science. Mike Kelly is always called in for his expertise, and Meg can attest to, as much as I think a lot of the families like to sit down and talk with Mike, the biotech companies that are looking at Duchenne love to talk to Mike, and he spends many, many hours talking to these companies, helping them understand Duchenne and helping them design their clinical trials correctly. So we bring a lot more than just money to the party. And so, there's a lot of different types of models for venture philanthropy. And some, just being this week on this panel, and I'm looking forward to Joan, who I'll introduce here in a minute, talk about different models. But every organization that has gotten into venture philanthropy business model has taken a different route, and so there's no one size fits all. And I just think that some of these meetings like we had this week earlier, where all the different organizations can get together and share best practices, is really going to move the needle forward. So just to summarize, CureDuchenne has funded 29 research projects. 9 of them have, I think it's actually more like 10 or 11 now, have progressed into human clinical trials. 91% of our dollars go back into research programs. The first FDA-approved drug, this is a real prime example of CureDuchenne being there early and supporting a technology before it had mass appeal to the Duchenne community. Before Sarepta was named Sarepta, it was AVI Biopharma. It was a small biotech company outside of Seattle, and they didn't have the money to go into clinical trials. They had to do some additional tox studies, and they could not, the investors weren't looking forward to it. They didn't understand the science well enough. The Duchenne community, for the most part, really wasn't that interested. They just felt that the company had had some problems, and they didn't want to make that investment. And so with our scientific advisory board and Foundation to Eradicate Duchenne in Washington, D.C., and Children's National Medical Center, Eric Hoffman, we came together and cobbled together the money to give to AVI so that they could do the toxicology study, because we believed in this therapy. We believed that exon skipping had a really strong future, and so they did their clinical trial. And I think most of us here know the history and what came next. And we were just thrilled that Sarepta and eteplirsen became the first drug ever approved for Duchenne. So that shows how we take the risk really, really early on. And again, resulting in just a massive amount of follow-on funding after we make our initial investments. And it's really funny, the very first company that we invested in, Prosenza, little tiny biotech company in the Netherlands, we invested $1.3 million, and we did a ton of due diligence with our attorneys, scientific advisory board, et cetera. But we were still sweating it because we had $10,000 in the bank when we signed this contract. And very shortly after we invested that amount of money, some VCs came in and contributed, I think it was either $12 or $18 million to the company. And we called the CEO and said, we feel so validated. We know they're a lot smarter than we are, so we feel like we really made a good move here. And he laughed and said, no, they came in because you came in. And so Mike Kelly likes to call it the CureDuchenne bump, where when CureDuchenne invests in a company, people know that we've done the due diligence, and so it does get the stamp of approval. So this is our portfolio of companies that we funded, and it ranges everything from newborn screening all the way to access to approved drugs for patients and everything in between in terms of exon skipping, gene therapy, gene editing, everything from just making small grants like we did to Sarepta and PTC early on to actually founding a company, Exonics Therapeutics, that you, I think, saw the new CSO speaking last night. And so we're very proud of the portfolio that we have. So I'm going to shift gears here, shift gears now for a moment and talk about cystic fibrosis. And I think almost everybody in this room knows about their tremendous success. And they really are the granddaddy, the model that we all aspire to in terms of venture philanthropy. And not just because they've been successful with the financial end of it, but because they actually have treatments on the market. And this organization has just done tremendous amount of good for the cystic fibrosis community. And I believe there's about 30,000 CF patients in the US. So, about twice as big as Duchenne, but still a rare disease. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has been acknowledged by the White House because of the tremendous work they've done. They have 10 approved treatments for the Duchenne or the CF community now. 70 CFF-supported multi-center trials last year. $169 million invested for laboratory research, preclinical development, specialized care. I can't read that last one, but I mean, they've been well-rounded. They've been top of the game in all aspects. And in 2014, this was just the envy of the Duchenne community. But Bob Bell, the president and CEO of Cystic Fibrosis at the time, said, "Today we announced that our drug development affiliate, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation Therapeutics, has sold its royalty rights to CF treatments developed by Vertex Pharmaceuticals to Royalty Pharma for $3.3 billion. Can you imagine what we as a community, the Duchenne community, could do with $3.3 billion? It would be remarkable. So at this point, At this point, it's my pleasure to invite Joan Finnegan Brooks to come up on stage and have a chat with us. Joan has been a lifelong advocate for cystic fibrosis and also has lived with cystic fibrosis and obviously successfully. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. If I can, I'm too short to really sit on this chair very well.
Would you please just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit?
Sure. So I am an adult with cystic fibrosis, and when I was born a very long time ago, my life expectancy was, if I was lucky, I would get to be school-aged. So clearly I'm beyond school age, and I'm very proud. I'm probably the only woman in the room over 50 that will tell you that. I'm 58, and I'm just, every birthday for me is significant. And I was born into a great family. My parents actually lost 2 other children with cystic fibrosis. I was adopted by them. and really learned so much about how to take care of myself when there was really no treatments back in the 60s and the 70s to rely on. And I've been a lifelong volunteer with the CF Foundation. My parents were among the early volunteers that started the foundation in 1955. And I've always been active both in the New York area, and I live here in the Boston area. And it's so important for me as an adult, because there's many more adults behind me, but there's not many people left in my age cohort. And it was important for me, since I lost older siblings with CF, to be visible in the community, to educate people about cystic fibrosis and how they could help. And so I've been involved on the national level on a lot of different clinical care guideline committees. I've done a peer mentoring group. I've been involved in clinical trial education in our population, and lots of different things over 30-something years. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm thrilled to address you today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask the first question, very, very broad question. Cystic fibrosis obviously has been very successful in selecting and supporting the science, supporting investigators, organizations, and all different aspects of development. If you could describe, what factors, if you could choose 3 things that have been really stand out in terms of the success of cystic fibrosis over the years, not just again in the financial returns, but basically in how they've helped patients.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different arms to the CF Foundation, so they have a great clinical care network that they've developed through the years. And way before it was a buzzword in healthcare, we've done quality improvement across our centers. We probably have about 115 centers across the country that deliver very specialized interdisciplinary care to our population. And we've looked at what about the best centers can we duplicate and make sure that everybody across the country, regardless of where they live, is getting excellent care and can do as well as they possibly can do. So I think the clinical resources, we've invested a lot in the clinical research arm and the infrastructure that's required to execute clinical research, which has been so important for us. And I think we have a great leadership team that Bob Bell retired a couple of years ago, but the continuity there is tremendous to carry the vision forward of a very unified community that is impatient for treatments that are life-changing. And that's really what started the entire movement is, despite the fact that we had found the gene that causes cystic fibrosis in 1989, we had an exponential increase in research papers generated, but no game-changing therapies. All the therapies that had been developed in the early 90s, and I can count them on 3 fingers, were all aimed at symptom management, trying to manage the infections that happen in people's lungs, trying to combat the stickiness of the mucus that accumulates in the lungs. So everything had been symptom-based, and Bob Bell, our CEO and foundation president at the time, thought we can't continue on this pace and make life-changing impact. And so he started to invest in a process called High-Throughput Screening to see if they could find a small molecule that would have an effect on the basic defect of CF. And that really, identifying what it is that you want to do, having the research, certainly the academic world is very, very important in fueling that kind of knowledge, and then being able to take it from bench to bedside. We always talk about how do you get treatments from the laboratory out to the patients, and we have to do that faster because we're losing lives every day. And that's really, I think, our expertise. We partner with companies and we provide medical expertise, scientific research, infrastructure to do the clinical trial, access to our patient network. All of those things I think are really key contributors to our success, our broad success.
So you certainly have had success with getting drugs approved into market. Could you describe the process from, first identifying a molecule, a drug, a therapy, and that decision of whether to fund an academic scientist, or what the process is when you actually do invest in, or when they actually invest in a company?
Right. So I just want to make it clear, I don't work for the CF Foundation. So
I have to watch my verbiage, I know.
Yeah, so I'm a volunteer, but I can certainly tell you my perception is that the foundation has identified, either companies come to the foundation at this point, or the foundation hears of a technology or something that is of interest in the lab, and they will then go and see if that's a conversation, if it's something that we as a foundation can support to take it from very early stage. And Debra talked about this before, but really lowering the risk. There's tremendous risk for small companies especially, and certainly big pharma companies are not looking at cystic fibrosis as a blockbuster market because the size of it is so small, but looking at if they can make a difference and how to mitigate that risk, how to lower the risk. And so that's what we've been able to do. We've provided great scientific advisors, outside people. They're not employed by the foundation. We have a tremendous network across the country of different academic researchers. We have different clinicians, and we leverage their knowledge for our gain in terms of, can they help with their expertise to structure a clinical trial that would be meaningful to the community and would be successful. And I think all those kind of resources, not just monetarily, are very, very structured with milestone, deliverables, and we've been very successful in not all projects, but in some projects being able to see it through phase 1, phase 2, and usually by that time, companies can invest either their own capital or they can attract other investors to come on board. But I think early risk mitigation is really important for us, and that's been key. And I certainly, as a community member, have full confidence in who the foundation is picking to help companies depending on their expertise, and that has been a really well-working model for us.
I know that even though we do make investments in companies, CureDuchenne is first and foremost interested in the science, and we vet as much as possible the technology and the management team, and the applicability to Duchenne, and whether it's really serving a gap. And then after that, it's like, and then let's look and see what the financial return might be. So I would assume it's very similar, where you are searching for the best science, the best programs, and then after that, deciding what the business structure would be.
Yeah, I think, and again, speaking sort of from an outsider point of view, but I think it's really important to. The goal here, the reason that we do this, is to bring life-changing therapies to our community, period. End of story. That's it. And to the extent that the foundation is in a position to leverage what they can do, what they can bring to the table, whether that's money, scientific expertise, clinical expertise, research expertise, that's what they're doing. They structure their deals, I think, very, very smartly in terms of contract milestones, so that if a program is not progressing or if it's not getting, the science is not proving. I mean, we all know that not every compound that's developed that looks great in the beginning is going to make it through for various reasons to be an approved drug. But I think they've just got a very, very good vetting process and make sure that they are, I suppose, paid back for that investment, certainly, to then fund other things. So, our medical budget has just grown exponentially because of we haven't changed anything that we've been doing as a foundation in terms of we still do a ton of fundraising. We still have we still try to do a high profile and have successes and support our clinic environment and the research infrastructure and all those kinds of things that I think are really critical for success. But it's I think a testament to our community's cohesiveness and to their support for wanting to enable the foundation to act on our behalf.
Mm-hmm. And so having obviously great success in the science and actually getting drugs to patients, what has it meant to Cystic Fibrosis Foundation to have that influx of capital? And how has that funding been used? Is it mostly going back into research now to drive future programs? Right. Has it changed the goals of the foundation, the timelines, the expectations?
Right. So, I mean, certainly, I remember the day I read in the New York Times that the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation received a $3.3 billion royalty. And I've never seen the word cystic fibrosis and billion in the same sentence ever, and never thought I would. And I grabbed the back of a chair because I thought I got lightheaded. I was like, wow, this is something. But I have to, I don't know in the particulars. I mean, we disclose that we have this large, sum of money, but business as usual. We're still, pressing the throttle on the fundraising side of our organization. And what I think it has done is attracted, the result of our success is that now other companies are interested because they realize there is an opportunity to make a return on their investment. And they're now much more interested in CF and delivering the next generation of these, fancy molecules. And I think it's really broadened. There's companies now that 5 years ago I had never even heard of who are now partnering with the foundation because of different aspects of their expertise. And I think what it's allowed the foundation, and again, I'm speaking just as, my perspective is, that money is not being used in the way of, writing a check against it. What it's doing, though, is allowing us to look at a much longer period of time and looking at what comes next after this round, if you will, of very, very important molecules that have helped a lot of people, but they're not curative. We lose people every day. They die of lung disease. And we haven't saved anyone. We haven't saved anyone from cystic fibrosis yet. But it allows us to look forward to say what's next. Because our disease, it's a single gene, but there's over 2,000 different mutations of that gene. So we cannot design clinical trials to test every combination. You need 2 combinations to cause cystic fibrosis, and it's just an impractical matter. So now we're looking at gene editing. We're looking at CRISPR technology. We're looking at things that just seemed like science fiction, and I think they are to some degree, but they're probably now not 25 years in the future, maybe they're 10 years in the future. And that makes all the difference if we can bridge people from where they are today to be healthy enough to have a benefit when those other therapies come about. I think it's really powerful. And I have not personally benefited from these life-changing therapies. They affect first about 4% of our population and then a little bit broader because it's all mutation specific.
It sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Right. So, and now we have 3 different drugs that we call Cftr Modulators, and they help regulate chloride, which is the basic defect in cystic fibrosis. And my mutation profile is not eligible. So I'm still waiting, but I'm still as hopeful, probably more hopeful than I've ever been my entire life, because the proof of concept is now there. And we're going to find better molecules to help everybody. Our new slogan is, until everyone has an effective therapy. And that mission is, near and dear to everybody's heart. So I think the windfall was great, and it brought us a lot of notoriety, both good and bad in some ways. But I think it's just been able to perpetuate a rolling research machine in terms of being able to invest in promising therapies that hopefully will be groundbreaking for our community.
In addition to biotech and pharma being more interested in cystic fibrosis, I would imagine it spawned a whole new generation of academic researchers, early researchers that are bringing those new innovative ideas and have a long career to work on the disease, because they know that there's a future, that their grants will be funded, that their projects will be able to be taken into drug development.
Right. Well, Francis Collins, who is the acting he is the director of the National Institutes of Health, was part of a team that discovered the gene for cystic fibrosis in 1989. So, it is all about basic research, because that fuels your knowledge base. Once we found the gene, then we figured out, or tried to figure out, what does that mean? What does it do? It's a protein. What does that protein do? What's the defect? I mean, I always think of it as an onion. Like, the more you know, the more you peel back, the more you realize you don't know. And there's so much more. And we're still, academic publishing papers in cystic fibrosis in every area is still steeply going up, which is great. To your point, it draws a lot more people in, because I think our success story, people want to be part of it. And the science now, we're finally coming into an age where the technology will really be able to help our populations, whether it's through new therapies or gene editing in the future, or development of new product.
It's fantastic. Looking back, and you're not old enough to know this in the beginning, but so, the money to fund these projects came through philanthropy. It came through donors. Yeah. Could you describe how that money was raised? Was it CF families? Was
Sure.
it, how did you get the initial capital to do this?
Well, I can tell you, my mom and my dad were they had already lost a child at age 2.5 in the 50s, and had a little boy, my brother John, at 6 years old, and then I was adopted. And my mother, it was all community-based, right? It was knocking on the doors of your local businesses and seeing if they could raise money to fund any kind of research. And my mom, over the years, can't believe how far we've come. And we do special events. We have a chapter here in Massachusetts, combined with Rhode Island, and probably 40 weekends of the year, we've got some kind of an event going. And I participate in a lot of them. I did a bicycle ride in Rhode Island this fall, a couple of months ago. And the first thing I always tell people is, our success is because of you. It's because of everybody who participates, everybody who is funding these different events and having a fun time, or doing a walkathon, or whatever the event is. That's like, I created the foundation. I'm doing the work. It's all about the I's collectively have enabled us to have success. And I think, for us as a foundation, our mission has always been to find a cure and better treatments for cystic fibrosis, period. Now we've broadened a little bit. That's our main focus, and now we have a little bit more breadth in terms of covering or addressing adult issues, because when I was a kid, no one was adult. Yeah. So these are new problems to have, and these are great problems to have. I never created an IRA because I never thought I would need to. And now I'm closer to retirement age than I am to starting a career. And so these things happen, but it's because of the community that we've been able to really engage with special events and annual funds. And we have a very special family who I have to mention, Joe O'Donnell and his wife Kathy. They lost their 12-year-old son in the 80s. And they created a foundation called the Joey Fund. And that has funded the CF Foundation and families in our area very, very generously. And Joe, for probably 10 years, was tapped to bring on or start a capital campaign to raise $175 million for no building, no hospital, no wing of a hospital. No name says Joe O'Donnell, but he was able to tell people the story about cystic fibrosis and how we're going to get to where we want to go. And that money, which was never done at the time, because who does that if you don't have a capital campaign is a capital campaign. You name a building after someone. And this was unlike anything. And it really jump-started our entire investment portfolio to be able to have the liberty to invest in companies that seem to be interesting or might have some bearing on the course of the disease.
That's great. So the funding that allowed these investments to happen came from your community.
Right.
Grassroots, people just being committed to doing whatever they could to
Absolutely.
raise whatever money they could, that collectively it would be enough to invest in these companies.
Because we're not government sponsored.
Right.
I mean, certainly, a lot of our academic researchers will have grants that are from the CF Foundation. They might have another aspect of that grant that's funded by NIH. I mean, there's a lot of different sources, but we're not government supported. We're privately supported, donor supported, and that has not changed despite the windfall of that. I mean, that's how I treat it. It's almost like a footnote, not to poo-poo it at all, but it hasn't impacted people's daily life in terms of what they're focused on. We all know, regardless of whether you have an agent currently, a drug that you're taking that helps, that we've all got to keep on with this mission until it's done, until CF stands for Cure Found, not cystic fibrosis.
That. So. I like that.
Yeah.
Duchenne.
Yeah.
DMD. Let's work on that one. That's fantastic. How are we on time? I don't have a watch, and I have no idea where we are. I've been enjoying this. Okay, so, thank you so much. I mean, thank you for giving us your story. You've done a tremendous amount of good for your community, and just speaking, I think, to all of us helps us understand, and I think it gives us hope that we, as individuals, as parents, can have a part in finding the cure and funding the cure.
Absolutely, that's the way we did it.
Yeah.
And continue to do it. Whether it's now it's different. We address our audiences not just as parents, because that's what it was always. But now we have spouses,
Right.
and we have kids of people who have CF. Not a tremendous amount of them, but our audience is changing because the face of CF is changing, which is great, certainly great news all the way around.
That's great. Are there any questions here? Okay. Yes.
How do the two organizations or two diseases vary in terms of size? Is the CF community the same size as our Duchenne community?
By our calculations, I think we extrapolated that CF has about twice as many patients in the U.S. Well,
Mixed.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not sex-linked.
yeah.
There's probably 30,000 people in the CF community in the U.S. We have a very strong, robust patient registry, and we capture probably about 27,000 patients. That number clearly has grown because certainly we have deaths every day, but the number of adults now, that number is going to start to change and grow. And worldwide, probably 70,000, but still, rare disease, orphan disease.
Great. So this is great. I just, again, am in awe of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I think that they did just about everything right when they were formed, as soon as the gene was discovered. And, I've watched them for years, and I've just, been, met Preston Campbell and listened to him speak, and multiple conversations with Bob Bell. And, what I sensed from Mr. Bell the first time I talked to him was very soon after our son was diagnosed, and we decided to start CureDuchenne, and he was one of the first people I called. It's like, okay, you've done this right.
Yeah.
And from the beginning, they set up a business model. They ran it like a business in the beginning.
Yeah.
It was, they hired, professional people, PhDs, business people, and there was no nonsense. It wasn't touchy-feely.
I always joke with people, I'm like, this is not your grandma's charity organization. Yeah. This is a lean, mean fundraising machine. And I mean that in a complimentary way, even though it sounds so harsh. But to your point, they're all about business. Because what business? We're trying to prolong life.
Yeah.
And for our community. And they take it very seriously, always have. So the people who are in our offices are professional fundraisers. They're not just not professional fundraisers. And the organization from top down is PhD, MDs, the whole runs the gamut. Now we have advocacy, we have patient engagement, we have a lot of different arms to it. But I love the story from a business perspective. I was in business for a long time, and I love telling the story from a business perspective because it's a great success story of focus. Mm-hmm. Focus, strategy, and execution. And it's impacted, my life and my friends' lives and so on and so forth. So I'm pleased to tell it whenever I get asked.
Yeah, there have been times over the years that people have referred to CureDuchenne as being somewhat distant and maybe not as warm and fuzzy. And I really look at it that our business is the cure for Duchenne. I mean, it's our name, it's what we are intending to do. And, we don't have a lot of time for warm and fuzzy. And, as much as we do care and want to improve the care for all of these families, we do get down to business and we welcome, the patients and the families to join us and to be equally yoked on that also.
Great.
So,
I wish you good success.
Thank you, and congratulations on your success. And you're a walking testament of what can happen with good intention and a good group. Great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.